What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. We made it. We finally made it. I don't know about you guys, but like every season, there's like a different level of anticipation. Like I'm always excited. Clearly, it's me. It's the Packers. There's nothing like it, right? But some seasons, I'm like, all right, let's go. Let's do this. Like I'm excited. And then other years, there's just a level of ridiculous anticipation and I can't wait and I can't sleep and I just want the game to come. And that's this season for me. I'm all in. I cannot wait. I've been just anticipating the start of this game and this season for so long now. I don't know if it's because of how last season ended or if it's because of, what I was able to see in training camp. I can't put my finger on it exactly of why I'm so excited. I think it hit the sweet spot of like really good returning team, but there is a degree of freshness to this team that just makes it feel new again. And I think the return of Jair Alexander and hopefully whether it's this week or very soon, Elton Jenkins and David Bakhtiari along the offensive line, Robert Tunyan at tight end with additions like Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Devontae Wyatt, Quay Walker, like this entire Zach Tom, this entire rookie class, Juwann Reed, like even guys like Keyshawn Nixon, like I just ultimately feel like there is a level, there was a little bit of a refresh, right? I think sometimes when you've got an established team like this, it's easy. I look at the Milwaukee Bucks right now, right? Phenomenal team coming off a championship 2 seasons ago. Were fantastic last year, probably would have made another run at it, maybe even won it had it not been for a Chris Middleton injury and really just the team not maybe peaking at exactly the right time. But they've been sort of the same team now. I know they added Joe Ingles. This isn't supposed to be a Bucks podcast. I get that, but they added a Joe Ingles, but mostly kept everything the exact same. And I'm a pretty big believer that if you're staying the same, you're actually falling behind. And I don't know that this Green Bay team is better than they were a season ago. It's really hard to be better when you lose the best wide receiver in football. That's a tough ask for any team. But getting back, I don't know, maybe the top 3 left tackle or just tackle in football, getting back, maybe the best corner in football, getting back, I don't know, a top 10 or top 10, 15, 20 offensive linemen in football and Elton Jenkins, getting back a legit, really good starting tight end. They add a lot to this roster as well. And then adding in some really fun players like a Quay Walker, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, etc. They've added some really fun players to this team. They've added some much needed depth. They've solidified their defense. And I think this team is going to be very fun to watch. And I think a level of that anticipation is we just don't exactly know what this team's going to look like. Could they be great on defense? Yeah, I think they could. Could they maybe fall middle of the pack and maybe not be quite as good? I think that's a possibility. Could the special teams actually be decent? I don't know, maybe that's a stretch, but yeah, I think they maybe could. Could they be an unmitigated nightmare once again because that's what they do best? Yeah, that could happen as well. On offense, you've got one of the brightest offensive minds in football in Matt LaFleur, and you've got the MVP at quarterback with a really good running back tandem, an improved offensive line once they get healthy, which they will, a better tight end, and outside of losing that one wide receiver, they've basically kind of either stayed the same or improved at everywhere on offense. And I think if you told me that this was another, I don't know, top 7 or 8 offense, I'd be like, yeah. If you told me they fell to middle of the pack, I'd be like, okay, I get it. I understand. So I think the unknown and just the variances there on offense, defense, and special teams of just being like, this could go in a lot of different directions. If things hit on the poor end and this ends up being the 16th best offense and the 16th best defense and the 32nd ranked special teams, guess what? Maybe they're the 6th or 7th seed and probably eliminated early in the playoffs, but it's probably not going to look the way that we really want it to look. If it hits on the positive side, and this is a top 8 defense, a top 8 offense with a top 5 defense, and I don't know, maybe the 23rd, 24th, 25th best special teams, they're going to have a real legitimate shot, especially if they can peak at the right time. So I think that unknown and the excitement of that, of what this could be, you always have a chance to win a Super Bowl when number 12 is at quarterback. and we kick off another season of seeing how this team is going to play. So that's where I'm at. I am overjoyed. I'm excited. I think you can tell I am jacked up. I'm so excited for just this show today. I'm not going to go into super great detail on a lot of stuff today just because it's game day, right? Like that's what we're celebrating today. So I do want to get to the news that we got on Saturday, however. Green Bay did have 2 practice squad call-ups. Remember, we should be clear here. They don't have to call up anybody from the practice squad. That is a bonus, and it does cost them money to do that. It does cost them money, and it costs them money from the salary cap to do that. So they are paying those players to be on the 53, which costs additional money, which goes against the salary cap. It's not exorbitant, but it does count. It does add up over the course of the season, and they don't have to do that. So the fact that they wanted these 2 players up means something. It means that they are going to play these players, and it means that they wanted them active on the roster for the 48-man active game day roster. More on that in a moment. So the 2 players they call up, Juwann Winfree and Micah Abernathy. So wide receiver Winfree, safety Abernathy. So what does that mean? Because I think there's a decent amount that we can actually glean from these call-ups. Let's start with Juwann Winfree. The first thing I would say with Juwann Winfree is that probably puts a stake in any chance or hope that Allen Lazard plays. I don't think they bring up Winfree and use one of his 3 practice squad call-ups. Remember, each player only gets 3. I don't think they do that if Lazard is healthy. They've got, 7 wide receivers already active on their roster. More on that in just a moment. So I don't think activating another one when Lazard would be healthy would make a whole ton of sense here. So I think the first thing we can glean from Winfree being active is that I'm going to put a 99.99999% chance that Allen Lazard is inactive and not playing against the Vikings, which we already expected. He was doubtful. He didn't practice Friday. That doesn't change a whole heck of a lot, but I do think it puts sort of that final stake in it. Number 2, Micah Abernathy. What can we learn from that? I don't think there's as much to learn about Micah Abernathy being activated. I do think it will mean that another safety does get deactivated. More on that in just a moment. And I do wonder if Micah Abernathy is actually safety number 3 for the game day roster, because Dallin Leavitt looks awful as a safety. Let's just be real. He's coming off of an injury. He's still integrating into this defense, and he's just not a good safety. He's a really good special teams player. That's what he's there for. I don't think you want him on the field as a true safety in any capacity. Rudy Ford just got to Green Bay as well, and his main role is special teams. And the Jaguars, and I should emphasize this, the Jaguars, I know I say Jaguars, the Jaguars did not have any need for Rudy Ford at safety. They just wanted him as a special teams guy, and they couldn't really reconcile paying over $2 million for just a special teams guy. If the Jaguars did not want him at safety, it's probably not a great sign that he has a ton of upside as a safety, right? And he's been a mediocre safety over the course of his career. So it's very unlikely that Tariq Carpenter's ready for that role. So I think there is a real chance that should something happen, and maybe it's Rudy Ford, that wouldn't shock me either, but I think there's a real possibility that if one of those safeties go down, whether it be Savage or whether it be Amos, that Micah Abernathy might just be the next guy up. Now, they could go Rasul Douglas in that spot. Clearly, it may take a couple injuries to get there, but I don't know that Abernathy wouldn't be safety number 3. So that will be another thing to sort of keep an eye on. Hopefully, we don't have to keep an eye on it, right? Hopefully, Green Bay doesn't ever have that need for safety 3 and they don't have to get to that spot, but that will be something to monitor if it ever does get to that point. The other things that we can sort of glean from it, or I think is at least important to note, is no Patrick Taylor or Tyler Goodson. So they did not call up a number 3 running back. So that very much leads us to believe that it is officially Amari Rodgers' number 3 running back season. Now, that does not mean that he won't get some snaps at wide receiver. He is likely to be the primary punt returner. We'll see what they do at kick returner. And it very well could be him as well. But I think it's not just a chance, like he's running back 3 at this point. And that is a pretty interesting development. Now, how much time that equates to and how many snaps he actually gets in that role remains to be seen. I think we'll get a handful. I think we will get at least a handful of plays with Amari in the backfield. And I think that's going to be an interesting wrinkle that maybe, I'm sure Minnesota's prepared for because, Green Bay's shown a little bit of it, but very interested to see how that plays out. But there is no other running back on the roster. So this is Jones, Dillon, and then Amari Rodgers. Now, the odds that both a Jones and a Dillon would go out and they would need Amari Rodgers as a primary running back is very slim to none. I think even if it gets to that point, Green Bay would pretty much feel like they could just go basically with like a spread offense and just have Rodgers throw the ball in that situation. So I don't think there's a major downside there, but it was interesting nonetheless that no running back called up and just Amari Rodgers at the number 3. That leaves Amari Rodgers as the number 3 running back. So then I think the other thing we should discuss here is that they did not pull up an offensive lineman, maybe like a Caleb Jones. So does that mean that either David Bakhtiari or Elton Jenkins are going to be active? Not necessarily. You're not going to keep more than 8 active offensive linemen on game day. You're not usually going to keep less than 8 either, because if you only keep 7, you actually just lose out on a player. There's a rule that if you have 7 offensive linemen, you can only have 47 people active on game day. If you have 8, then you can have 48 people on game day. So there's no reason to go less than 8, and there's really no reason to go more than 8. And they have, even if they don't have Elton Jenkins or David Bakhtiari, they would still have 8 active offensive linemen. And Yosh Nijman, John Runyon Jr., Josh Myers, Jake Hansen, Royce Newman, Zach Tom, Sean Ryan, and Rasheed Walker. So they would still have 8. So I don't think that we can necessarily glean anything from the fact that there was no offensive lineman called up. So maybe Bakhtiari plays, maybe Jenkins plays, maybe they don't, but I don't think we can take anything away by the fact that they didn't call up an offensive lineman. So that leads us to the next question, and that is, who is likely to be on the inactive list? I think most of these are easy with a couple caveats. There will be 2 offensive linemen named inactive. Now, the group that will include, that those 2 will come out of, includes Elton Jenkins, David Bakhtiari, Rasheed Walker, and Sean Ryan. If Jenkins and Bakhtiari are active, Walker and Ryan will be inactive. If Jenkins and Bakhtiari are active, Walker and Ryan are inactive, in the reverse. I forget which one I said first, but you get it. So both of those are going to be replacing each other one way or the other. If only Jenkins or if only Bakhtiari can go, then they'll have to choose between Walker and Ryan. I don't know what direction they would go in. I would probably lean Sean Ryan, but I honestly don't know. I think actually Walker in his one game was better than anything that Sean Ryan showed on tape, but Sean Ryan has better versatility. So I would lean Sean Ryan, but it could be either. But 2 of those offensive linemen will be inactive between Jenkins, Bakhtiari, Walker, and Ryan. Jonathan Ford almost assuredly will be inactive. Alan Lazard will be inactive. I very much believe that Samori Toure will be inactive. I can't imagine that they need to keep 7 wide receivers. They have 5 guys that are for sure going to play already, and then Juwann Winfree would be 6. So there's no need for Torrey's not a special teams guy at this point. He's not a core special teamer, and he's not going to be one of their top 6 wide receivers. So he is an easy inactive in this game, in my opinion. So he would be the 5th in this scenario. Remember, they need to deactivate 7 because they called up 2 players. I think 1 of Jonathan Garvin, Kingsley Enagbare, and Tipa Naliai will be inactive. Which one? Tough to say. I would normally have said I think it's going to be Enagbare, and I think that's going to leave people disappointed because I think he actually might be the best of that group. But I think they're going to go with experience here, and I think both Garvin and especially Tipa have a little bit more special team. Well, Tipa has more special teams experience. Garvin has more in-game experience. I think they're going to go with a little bit more of the proven commodities there and keep Enagbare inactive. It could go either way. They could keep Garvin or maybe even Tipa inactive, but I'm going to say that Enagbare is probably the one of those 3. And then I think it'll be Tariq Carpenter as the other. I don't think they need 6 safeties active on game day. And I think they ultimately decided Abernathy is probably the better special teamer and the better safety at this point than Tariq Carpenter is. So I think that's the way that I go there. Now, other players that it could be, or maybe that you're questioning, if Dallin Leavitt, remember, he's not on the injury report, but he just took off the red jersey a couple days ago. If they felt like he was still maybe recovering a little bit from injury, maybe it could be Leavitt, but he was not listed with any injury designation. I think he's going to be good to go. I would be pretty surprised if it was Leavitt that was inactive instead of Carpenter. So very much think it's Carpenter there. You might be thinking, well, what about Tyler Davis? They could deactivate him. I think there's a slight chance that they could, but because Robert Tunyan is just coming back from injury, and because Mercedes Lewis is just a blocking tight end, DeGuara is more of that H-back, fullback kind of tight end, I think they're going to want at least one more true, pure receiving tight end on the roster, especially with Tunyan just coming back. So I would be surprised. And Davis is also a core special teamer. So I don't think it's going to be Tyler Davis that's inactive. They could go Devonte Wyatt as well alongside Jonathan Ford and have both of them inactive. That would leave only 4 defensive linemen. Probably not the worst case scenario because you're probably playing those for the majority of the snaps anyway. But if you had an injury, it would get dicey very fast in a game that's your first game of the year, that you could end up playing a lot of snaps on defense. You know Minnesota's going to run the ball a lot with Delvin Cook. I just don't think you want to get caught with your pants down and only having 4 defensive linemen active. So I would not say Devonte Wyatt either. Amari Rodgers is clearly going to be running back 3, their kick returner, punt returner, so it won't be him. And again, we already talked about offensive line, right? You can't deactivate another one because you just lose out on a player at that point. So I think very much 2 of the aforementioned offensive linemen out of Jenkins, Bach, Walker, and Ryan, Jonathan Ford, Alan Lazard, Samori Toure, 1 of the outside linebackers, and then Tariq Carpenter at safety. It seems very easy and obvious, and the offensive line very tough to project because we don't know Bakhtiari or Jenkins' status, but 2 of those, and I think it's probably going to be Enigbari that's the edge rusher there. But we shall see, and that's one of the fun things of game day is finding out who's actually going to be on the active roster. Now, really quick, a couple non-Packer things that I'm excited to watch on Sunday. Of course, Baker Mayfield versus his former team. If everyone's not cheering for Baker Mayfield against the Browns after that whole fiasco and trading for Deshaun Watson, I don't know what you're doing, but that just seems like very good theater. So I'm very excited about that. Bears 49ers, another intriguing one, and not because I think it's going to be a great game. I think the 49ers win that game pretty easily. I know it's in Chicago, but the NFC doesn't exactly have a super deep group of young, talented quarterbacks. And 2 of the ones that are in that group are Justin Fields and Trey Lance. And this could still go in a million different directions for both of those quarterbacks. Both of them could end up being Pro Bowl Hall of Famers. Both of them could end up being total complete busts. We just don't know. So this is going to be our first real true glance at both of those players in 2022 to see what type of quarterbacks they are at and what stage they're at in their progression right now. And that is, not just this game, clearly. Both of those guys are going to have, a long time to prove themselves in this league. But how good they are completely changes the course of the NFC over time. If Trey Lance looks great and looks like the next big thing, that changes the dynamics in the NFC for a very long time. If Justin Fields looks really good, like he could be a big thing in Chicago, that changes the dynamic in the NFC North very quickly. On the flip side, if Justin Fields looks like he's not going to turn out, Chicago basically kind of has to start from scratch again, find a new quarterback. Same thing with the 49ers. Do they go back to Jimmy Garoppolo? Do they go back to the drawing board? That would set their franchise back a ton. So that is another game that, while I don't think is necessarily going to be a great game, I am very interested to see in the progression and the status of those 2 quarterbacks. Bucks Cowboys, certainly because it's a very big game in the NFC, and we start to get to see, we saw the Rams on Thursday night, certainly very uninspiring. We'll get to see Packers and Vikings, and then, I think Bucks Cowboys, another one of those. And then last but not least, Eagles Lions. Eagles, I think, have the opportunity to be a very good team. I picked Packers Eagles in the NFC Championship game as my preseason prediction. I think the Eagles, the only question mark is Jalen Hurts. And if he can be solid to good, and we've seen the Eagles win with Carson Wentz and Nick Foles. Jalen Hurts can be at or above that level, in my opinion. So they have a very, very good team around him, and how they do and how the Lions look as well. I know it's just Jared Goff, but they've put some pretty interesting pieces onto that team. I'm interested to see how the Lions look as well. So those are the non-Packers items that I am watching on Sunday. But of course, we don't care all that much about that. We care about Packers Vikings. So I went through all my key matchups and who I think is going to decide the game. If you haven't checked yesterday's episode out, make sure to do that. But here's what I will specifically be watching in this game. First of all is the inactives. Who's active on the offensive line? Is there Jenkins? Is there Bakhtiari? Or is there neither of them? And then how do they have to, make the corresponding moves, and who starts without those 2? So we will see that first. That's the first thing that I'm looking for in this game. Number 2, who's making the plays at wide receiver on the key downs and in the key situations? 3rd and longs, game on the line, any of those sort of things where you've got to have a play. Who is stepping up and making that play? And also, This is our first glance at Romeo Doubs in a regular season game. It's our first game of Christian Watson, period. So I'm very interested to see how these young rookie receivers look in their very first game action, specifically against the Minnesota Vikings on a fast track, on a fast field. Those two have the ability to be real playmakers. I'm excited to see what they can do. Do we get any pony package, and how much do we get? Well, we see Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon on the field at the same time, and if so, is it effective? How often do they do it? I'm very excited to see, because I want those two on the field a lot, so I'm hoping they can be very effective with both on the field. So excited to see Campbell and Quay play together and what Quay can do in this defense in his first game. I do think there's going to be hiccups along the way, but I think he's going to make some big plays as well. I just can't wait to see Rashawn Gary again. He has the ability to tear through this league. He is that good. He is that powerful, and he's a beast. He's an absolute beast, and I'm so excited to watch him play football again. Same thing goes for Jair Alexander, and specifically in this game, I cannot wait to watch Jair Alexander versus Justin Jefferson. Just an absolute heavyweight fight, top wide receiver versus top corner. Could be game deciding, legitimately. Justin Jefferson, as I mentioned before, if Jair Alexander is able to maintain him last season in Minnesota, of course, Jair was out in that game. If Jair plays and maintains Jefferson in that game, there's no way Minnesota beats Green Bay in Minnesota a season ago. So that is a game-deciding matchup. It's very rare that a corner wide receiver matchup is going to decide a game. I think that one legitimately could. That is how important that matchup is for both teams. Very excited to see this Kevin O'Connell offense and really this new 3-4 defense in Minnesota. How effective are they? Are they a threat in the NFC? Do they look really good, or does it just look disjointed and doesn't look cohesive? That's another interesting thing in this game. I am excited is the wrong word. I'm intrigued to watch the special teams. Now, I'm so intrigued that I'm going to be watching like this with just a little slit right there to barely watch through, because I don't really want to watch it. But I do think they've got some players that can make the special teams tick a little bit. So I want to watch it. I don't really want to watch it, but I'm interested. It's kind of like a train wreck. You're a car wreck. You're watching it. You don't really want to watch it, but you got to see it nonetheless. I'm interested. You don't know what's going to happen, and I'm just going to be keeping an eye on it. Number 9, the return of Robert Tunyan. So excited to see him back in the fold and what he can do for this offense. And the Packers teammates are hyping up Tunyan in his return. Think he's going to be a big deal this year. So set your fantasy lineups accordingly. I would hold up a little bit until we get to see him in some game action and see how many snaps he actually gets. But I think Tunyan's going to have a big impact on this season overall. And yes, even if it's 5 snaps, I'm excited to see some Amari Rodgers at running back and what Matt LaFleur might have in mind for that type of gadget type player at that position. So that is another interesting one to me. Last but not least, the last thing I'll say here is just remember, win or lose, keep your, don't get your highs too high. Don't get your lows too low. That's what the playoffs are for. This is a 17-game season. Barring something catastrophic, this is going to be a very good Green Bay Packer team. Somewhere between, 10 and 14 wins. And yes, be great if they had 14 wins, and would be less great if they had 10 wins. But they're going to be in the big dance in January and February, or in January, like when the playoffs start. They're going to be there. How do they look and how do they progress through the course of the season? If they lose this game and it's because, Jenkins and Bakhtiari don't play and the offensive lineman looks like garbage and they can't really do much, okay, they've got some solutions down the road that they can fix that with, and really I trust Stenavich and Butkus to get them corrected moving forward. Rodgers will get the ball out of his hands quicker, and they'll adjust as needed as the season goes along. If they lose because of a bad call, if they lose because whatever, right? There's ways that they lose, and it just doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot. I think Green Bay's going to win this division. I think they're going to win it by a couple games. I think they're easily going to get in the playoffs, and then it comes down to January and February. So don't get the highs too high, even if they win by 30. Don't get the lows too lows, even if they lose by a bunch like they did in week 1 a season ago. They're going to be just fine. Watch the process and enjoy the process. Watch how they build through the course of the season. Now, if the special teams week in and week out continues to be an unmitigated nightmare, yeah, let's talk about it. Let's chat. Let's maybe panic a little bit. If The offensive line, if all of a sudden Bakhtiari has more and more setbacks and maybe Jenkins comes back, but the offensive line still doesn't look the way it's supposed to, all right, we can talk about it at that time. If all of a sudden Aaron Rodgers has a fall off or the wide receivers just can't get open against anyone, like defense doesn't look as good as they were supposed to be. Over time, we can go over and discuss those things, but one game can fluctuate in a million different ways. Look at the Rams, right? The Rams are going to be just fine. Probably a very easy playoff team as well. They looked awful against the Bills, and I'm not comparing the Vikings to the Bills, but the Rams are going to be just fine. They'll bounce back. They'll be a tough team to play all season long. They just got crushed by the Bills in the first game. They'll bounce back, and they'll be just fine. Whatever happens in this game, barring a catastrophic injury, Green Bay is going to be just fine, and like I said, win or lose. Even if they win, there's going to be a lot to correct. Even if they lose, they're going to be just fine. So don't get too high, don't get too low. Just watch the process and how they progress throughout the course of the season. That said, Packers 20, Vikings 16, low scoring game. Packers defense lives up to the hype. Packers offense struggles a little bit without Devontae and probably without Bakhtiari, maybe without Jenkins. But they get enough done just to get by, get a division win in Minnesota, and get home against Chicago next week. That is going to do it for me today. Enjoy the day. Enjoy the game. Packers football is back. I will be right back here tomorrow to break it all down. I cannot wait to go over everything. I don't even care what happens. I'm so excited to talk an actual Packer game that I'm already beaming because of it. So I will see you all tomorrow. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.